Happy Thursday, happy Black History Month, and happy webinar day. Welcome to the Race and Education webinars, Culturally Responsive Pedagogy and the Arts Conversation. Thank you all immensely for joining us on this very special Thursday for an amazing conversation about the power of the arts education in transforming school culture and challenging systemic racism in education. To lead today's conversation, we have Dr. Amelia Cray, Associate Professor of Art at the University of Arizona, Shauna Tucker, Executive Director of Kids Notes, Edwins Introduction, Dance, PE, Art, and Spanish teacher at KIPP DC Promise Academy, and Rosa Rodriguez-Williams, Senior Director of Belonging and Inclusion at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. We want to thank you all immensely for showing up for today's conversation. We want to hear your opinions, your thoughts, your engagement. So on Twitter, please feel free to use the hashtag race and education when you're tweeting about today's conversation. Also at the bottom of your screen is a QA tool. Please post your questions, comments, responses, feelings, but mostly your questions in that Q&A tool so that we can engage with them during today's conversation. I also want to give a special shout out to all the people who worked behind the scenes to make today's conversation happen. Jen, Abigail, Guy, Ramon, thank you immensely for all of your wonderful work putting together today's conversation. Again, our panelists are Dr. Amelia Cray, Associate Professor of Art at the University of Arizona, Shauna Tucker, Executive Director of Kids Notes, Edwins Introduction, Dance, PE, Art, and Spanish teacher at KIPP DC Promise Academy, and Rosa Rodriguez-Williams, Senior Director of Belonging and Inclusion at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. For those of you joining for the first time, the Hunt Institute was created to be a resource for education policymakers and education leaders trying to create more equitable change for communities. This specific webinar series is a continuation of that work, spotlighting the most salient conversations at the intersection between race and education. Today, we're joined by leaders who are leveraging the arts as a tool to advance equity and engagement in schools and communities across the country. Research has confirmed the power of an arts education to help stimulate children's academic and cognitive development. For instance, a recent study found that students who played musical instruments from elementary school into high school were roughly one academic year ahead of their peers in English, mathematics, and science. With recent calls for the importance of representation, we now have the opportunity to lace curriculum, especially in musical education, and center the experiences and identities of communities of color. So we thank you all for joining us for today's important conversation on culturally responsive pedagogy in the arts. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Amelia Cray to begin the conversation. Thank you immensely.
Here we go. Thank you, Senegal. I want to start by thanking the Hunt Institute for convening a conversation on the important topic of culturally responsive education and the arts. I'm speaking to you from the University of Arizona, located in Tucson, the ancestral territories of the Pascua Yaqui and Tohono O'odham peoples who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. I teach artists and prepare future arts educators to be culturally responsive and therefore effective in their teaching practice. And I conduct research on arts equity throughout the K-12 arts education pipeline. At the University of Arizona, we just launched the Racial Justice Studio, a hub for campus and virtual activities to promote a deep understanding of racism and anti-racism by centering artistic and creative practice. Each of today's panelists is grappling with related issues and concerns, but in very different contexts and with different resources. Shauna Tucker, Edwins Introduction, and Rosa Rodriguez-Williams, I am so excited for the opportunity to speak with you and learn from you. Thank you so much for being here. I want to start with Shauna, but also invite all of you to introduce yourselves by telling us first how you come to the work of culturally responsive teaching and the arts, and then tell us in your experience, how have the arts supported students of color to better engage with their education? Shauna?
Yes. So first, I am so happy to be here with all of you, and just thank you to the Hunt Institute for the invitation. I'm just looking forward to hearing and learning from and growing from this conversation with my fellow panelists. So had to say it. I am a cellist by training. I'm a singer-songwriter, teaching artist, arts advocate, citizen artist, mom, and now I'm the executive director of a music for social change organization in Durham, North Carolina. I didn't see myself on stage until I was almost 20 years old. This was in the early 90s. This was before Google. So if it wasn't in an encyclopedia or microfiche or something like that, it just wasn't, I didn't have access to it. And I knew that I wanted to play cello, but I didn't know how I wanted to play cello. I just knew that classical was something that I enjoyed to listen to, but it didn't resonate in my soul. And then I saw myself on stage at Howard University. The Uptown String Quartet came to do a workshop, and I saw these 4 Black women, and they were playing my instruments, and they were in string quartet, and they were playing like this with this bass, you know? And they went from classical to jazz to some other stuff that I didn't know anything about yet. And I was like, there's me, that is me, that right there. And so for Kids Notes, for our kids that are, you know, the language is Title I schools and under-resourced communities, Black and brown children, Latinx, our percentages are in the 40% percentiles in Durham public schools and Wake County public schools. The access to better engage in the education, there is a magic that happens when these children come to us after school and they have an instrument in their hands for the very first time. It's like a superpower, because it doesn't matter that they don't know how to play. What matters is that they want to try. What matters is that they understand that we're trusting them with this special thing. What matters is that we are telling them, you can do this. There's no barrier for you to be able to express yourself and to access joy through music. So let's just start. We're going to be your guides, and you tell us how you want to show up. Our kids come to school largely because they have Kids Notes after school. And so in that space, if they are in the place, if they're in the space during the day, and we are teaching and sharing a model of citizen artistry and excellence and rigor and social justice and all of these things that are not just music. You have to show up in other places in your life, not just when you're here playing music with us. So for our kids, being a gateway after school, but requiring that they come to school in order to be in our program, all of them automatically engages and provides us a space for engagement that I think is just a breeding ground for success.
I'm really appreciating the synergy that you're talking about between formal in-school instruction and what happens in informal spaces, and the importance of both of those and being in sync with one another. Edwin, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. And first and foremost, let me say thank you to the Hunt Institute for allowing us to have this platform, which is not something that happens every day for teachers like us, right? Who teach something a little bit different than just math and reading. My name is Edwin Sorto. I teach PE, dance, art, and Spanish at KIPDC Promise Academy, a public charter school in Washington, D.C. Just a little bit about me. I immigrated to the United States from El Salvador when I was 12, and I am a first generation college graduate. When I came to the United States, dance was the universal language that connected me with my peers. So learning content while simultaneously learning to speak English in middle school was tough. Breakdancing was something that my friends and I, we could do together, and it just didn't require me to. It didn't require me to speak English perfectly. So it was pretty cool. Music was also a gateway to the English language, right? Because language is a language, it's not a skill. And then as I learned new American songs and spent time figuring out the lyrics, I was able to put together a lot of things that didn't make sense to me. I teach at a predominantly African American school, and for some, it is not intuitive why Latin dance is so engaging for my students. For them, the arts are both a mirror and a window. A mirror because in my teaching, I ensure that they see themselves, right? Uh, Latin rhythms were born in Africa, and as many of my students see, they get to see how their roots and the roots of our dances are just intertwined. But Latin dance is also a window. Each rhythm and step has his own history. Um, and while the seeds is African, the flower and the fruit takes us to all these beautiful places: Puerto Rico, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Colombia, the United States, and other in other places. Dance is an amazing tool for helping students live their best lives, in my opinion. Uh, the combination of music and movement, it enriches their growing brains, and I have proof, and it gives them a safe environment to express themselves, and it all brings joys to their day. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. I'm picking up on this idea that the arts are uniquely effective in helping young people know the world and the diaspora of people and cultures. And that seems critical to me, particularly in the 21st century. And this is a nice connect to Rosa. Rosa, can you tell us about your background and how the arts have supported students of color to better engage with their education?
Yeah, so thank you, Hunt Institute, and everyone on this call. I just love that I get to do this in this space. I'm usually not invited to this space. I'm not a teacher per se, although I do tons of trainings and workshops and those sorts of things. And I've just started my role here at the MFA. I've loved the arts, although God never blessed me with any talent to do it, but I've loved the arts, and I'm grateful to be here. In terms of my name is Rosa Rodriguez Williams, and I'm the Senior Director of Belonging and Inclusion at the Museum of Fine Arts. As it was said, my preferred pronouns are she, her, and ella. And I was born in Puerto Rico, which makes me Boricua, but I came in this country when I was 8 years old. My background is, low income, high crime, inner city community. My friends were from different races, ethnicities, and religions. And, I share that to say that like many of you, this is the self that comes with me every day to work, the self that does this work, right? I believe that people who take on this kind of work, the work that I do, I'm specifically talking about inclusion in predominantly white spaces, feel passionately about it because of a deep experience that they have had, that in some way has deeply shaped them. And so when I share those things, I share them not just to tell you about myself, but to tell you the self that comes to work, how I intersect with the world and how the world intersects with me, and sort of how, in our professions, whether in the work that I do, as teachers, as however we show up, our identities show up with us. And so it's sort of the lens that we bring into our work and how we approach it. And so, why is important for students of color? Because representation matters, and to feel like you belong anywhere, like you're capable and may have the capacity to be in a space or be part of a certain profession or community or share your talents, you have to see someone that you can relate to in those spaces. I'm new to art. I'm new to the art world. My background is in higher education, where I spent 13 years at Northeastern University, curating space for students of color. And so, you know, but I have become familiar in my time with the benefits of art and art education. And, you know, I remember a friend of mine um, uh, in grammar school who struggled with academics and but was incredibly talented. And I could see a shift in his confidence as he approached his schoolwork and others, and even himself after he engaged with art and after he engaged in that space that, you know, he can express himself more fully. And so that resonates with me the most, because there's a deepening of the understanding of self and culture. And in terms of where I sit, you know, I do want to say this, and end with this, is that, you know, I believe, and in my time in this, in working here, and what I've learned and observed so far, I believe that culture and art and cultural institutions are closely tied to identity formation. When we emphasize, when you know, we, the sort of the collective we, right, the pedagogy, the classrooms, the institutions, when we emphasize white cultural perspectives in our cultural institutions, in our classrooms, we erase that BIPOC experience and perspective, and then the positionality within a larger society is sort of erased, and so our students and ourselves, you know, we are robbed of that cultural understanding. You know, I as you know, Basquiat is an exhibition here, and when I went to see Basquiat, when I say that cultural institutions are sort of a window to ourselves and to identity experience, I saw a Haitian Puerto Rican man being exhibited in a fine arts museum. And so that encourages me, but also lets me know that there are other people like me who desire to see themselves in spaces like the MFA.
Wow. I mean, all of you have noted how important the arts are in conversations about educational equity, because they engage students' sense of self, their identities, and their imaginations. Recently, hip-hop education scholar Kristen Emden, some of you may have read his really fantastic books, he recently tweeted that education without activating the imagination is preparation for a life without meaning. Right? Just sit with that for a minute. I mean, it's really powerful. And he goes on to say, and I love this, there is no learning that sticks that doesn't make you think and dream. And so I'm really interested in this imagination and the dreaming piece as central to educational equity conversations. So Edwin, let's go back to you. For many of the students you serve, dance is a meaningful element of their home cultures, their ancestral heritage. Can you speak to the impact of honoring the cultures of your students and their families in your classroom, and how this lends itself to creating a culturally responsive space for learning?
Absolutely. So Latin dance was born in Africa, right? Uh, Without our hand drums and rhythms, we wouldn't have merengue, song, salsa, bachata, or any other modern partner line dances that I teach. So beyond those ancestral roots, salsa in particular was heavily influenced by African American jazz musicians, right? Which can be seen specifically through the brass components of large salsa bands, if you ever seen one. But because I teach elementary school, my students are all at different places in their cultural identity development, okay? And I see my role as highlighting their connection to the cultural fabric of the arts in general, and to the arts in general. And they are not just consumers of the art, like people think, right? They are creators of the art. And that creativity and brilliance is their birthright, in my opinion.
That's really powerful. I mean, the importance of creation, of production, not just consumption, right? Not just a passive media consumer role for young folks. Rosa, this is making me think about museums, the MFA Boston, right? How Western museums have long been places that exoticize and exclude Black and Indigenous people and other people of color. So how does your work at the MFA Boston push to change this dynamic, particularly through a youth and education lens?
I always stay muted. So, you know, I'm fairly new to the space. And so I've been sort of in a learning and listening tour as I've began my time here. And so, you know, I think as in my short time, you know, one of my, and I don't want to say concerns, but one of the things that I think about that stay with me, that I grapple with, is that, you know, institutions in general are meeting this moment, whether it's the MFA or any other cultural institution or higher ed or what have you, you know, are meeting this moment without dismantling, but, you know, but keeping what is and strategizing within a system that centers whiteness and white supremacist cultural narratives, right? So, you know, you sort of keep what is, and then you add a dash of this, and you mix it with that, and then, you know, so you throw a strategy in here, and we will be okay. Let's just mix it together and bake this cake, and sort of it looks great. When the reality is that, you know, to create real change in an institution, that for a very long time has operated in a manner that has made certain groups of people feel excluded. We have to take a deep dive into what that is, and, you know, in terms of decentering whiteness, you know, interrupting narratives that normalize the cultures, the histories, the experiences, the ideas, bodies, et cetera, of this sort of narrative. You know, what is on the walls at museums and cultural institutions, someone put it there for a reason and on purpose. And so the question is why? And then the question is who? And starting to dismantle through those questions, who are the experts and who are the voices, and what frameworks are we using to decide what is seen, and who decides what is fine art and what is not. You know, I think for me in my work, I'm thinking about embedding and integrating inclusion lens in every department. You know, having staff here see themselves as facilitators of that museum experience, really having, you know, critical reflection about how our identities show up in our work and how we approach our work because of the way our identities show up, right? And so, but you know, I will also say that the MFA has done some great work, and in terms of teen and youth. You know, we have our teen programs, we have sort of the to dismantle some of those things, to sort of address some of those things. You know, I don't know if any of you have been here in Boston, but there's the Black Histories, Black Future exhibition that was completely curated by teens in the city of Boston. They were all students of color that were part of Curatorial Study Hall. And so expanding some more of those programs, you know, our community arts initiatives that focus within the inner city communities, that have fully accessible curriculums that are not barriers to learning. And, you know, thinking about, you know, high school, and we're thinking about starting pipelines that change the museum feel from like this strange place that is not for me. Like, that's the way I grew up. Like, I'm not going there. People like me don't go there, right? But changing that narrative for them early on, where these weird objects that I don't understand become a relatable space that they take ownership over. So expanding some more of those programs as we are currently doing, and then building on them as well.
I appreciate your comments that really help us to understand what it means to sustain institutions by helping them evolve, by helping them to change and become responsive in times of change. Yeah. You know, music is one of the art forms that has really helped sustain me this year. I know I am not the only one here for whom that's true. Shauna Kids Note's mission is to change lives through the power of music. Would you share with us how music can be a catalyst for change, specifically for young people who may feel marginalized in their school environment?
Sure. So Kids Notes is an organization that is based on El Sistema principles. And El Sistema, essentially, I like to use the word movement because it just feels, you know, like it just gives me and everybody involved power, right? But essentially, it's a set of inspiring ideals that inform an intensive youth music program I am reading that seeks to affect social change through the ambitious pursuit of musical excellence, of musical excellence. Like, I'm underscoring that. And El Sistema focuses primarily on youth that have in areas with limited resources, where the resources are few and the need is the greatest. And so within that space, there is a truth that every human being deserves and has a right to dignity and contribution filled with beauty. And specifically that every child can learn to experience and express music and art deeply and can receive its many benefits and can make healthier, critical life choices as a result. So what that means with me looking at the camera is that there is an intrinsic right to make and to create and to tap into that space and to not have a barrier of access to the most creative parts of ourselves. And so in that space, music as a universal language, I mean, Edwin said it, you know, before he knew English, he knew art, right? And he is communicating with his friends without having to worry about, am I saying this right? Am I pronouncing this right? It's like, you know, am I doing this right? Am I playing this right? There's a way that we can connect in a collaborative space, in this concept of life as an orchestra that doesn't need words. It is just, are we aligned here? Are we aligned here? Are we aligned? I'm doing this because I'm a string player and I'm cellist, but you know, you can't see that in the in the Zoom box. But there's a stimulus in this language. There is an access to a source that energizes you. There's access to joy. We call Kids Notes and we call the people involved in keeping this machine going. It's a joy machine. It is in these times when, you know, this is life, right? This is a meeting, this is school, this is church, this is talking to your folks, this family reunion is all happening on screens for now. And unfortunately, that is having some serious repercussions on everybody's spirit, but especially our kids. And so if there is an access point to creativity, if there's an access point specifically to music, if there is a way that our teaching artists are empowering our students to make music, not because we said so, but because we are essentially your guides, we're your tour guides into this wonderful world of creativity, where you can make choices, where you can participate and say, I listened to this. So we're gonna learn about eighth notes today. Well, what about this rhythm? Because I like this artist. So can we learn that? Why not? Music is music, right? There's so much of a relevance and representation. I know that I'm not the only person that when I see something that I can relate to, I'm more inclined to pay attention. So we try as much as possible to make sure that Kids Notes is not just this type of music in these 2 hours after school, and then the whole rest of your life is not that. Bring your life into Kids Notes. And in that way, this community has a sort of infinitesimal access to the joy that our kids are discovering in, within the four walls or the virtual spaces. When they're at home, the joy is happening because people are hearing them, not just work out the notes, but also work on the notes and work out the notes. And we're hearing not just music, but we're hearing a commitment to being better. Like there's so much there. But I'm going to mute myself because someone else needs to talk now.
I want to invite all of you who are watching and listening to this really fantastic conversation to engage with us through the Q&A. Please post your questions in the Q&A. We want to hear from you on this topic. Share with us what you were thinking, most especially your questions. Picking up on your last comment, Shauna, this idea about the right to create, to imagine, right? Before, Edwin described it as a birthright, right? To learn in ways that are rooted foremost in one's own experience. That seems central to this conversation about being culturally responsive through the arts. We have a question that's been posted from Jason Anderson. He asks, any suggestions on how we ensure culturally responsive arts education is systemic through states and local education systems, rather than just one-offs with educators who feel a personal connection to this work? Edwin, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure.
I have to process it before I answer.
Yeah, and I'd like to hear from everyone on this, but I want to start from the perspective of someone working in the classroom, right? From one of these teachers, an educator that Jason is asking about. He's wanting suggestions on how we can ensure culturally responsive arts education is systemic, that it runs through states and local education systems, rather than leaving it to be a one-off, that just is a happenstance if the educator feels personally connected to the work. How can we move it to a systems level?
I feel like it all comes down from the top, right? Like who is making those decisions for the educational system? If you have someone that doesn't understand the benefits of the art in the school education system, I think it's not going to happen. So we, as much as us teachers, we want to integrate all of it or incorporate all the arts in our classrooms. At the end of the day, it all comes down from the top, right? I've been lucky to, to be able to do this with my schools because they believe that it is important for my kids. So props to KIPP DC for allowing me to do this. But at the same time, there are other schools that should be following these steps, right? And I know a lot of schools are not getting to do that because they are restricted to either the money, either the or they don't have the right teachers to teach, or you're looking for the wrong qualifications in a teacher to teach in a classroom. All of these tests that teachers are requiring to take, I don't think that's it. I don't think that's what makes a teacher. A degree of this level of, it could be any high school in the nation, right? But if you put that teacher in a classroom and he's not, or he or she's not the right person for the kids, your title doesn't matter, right? But at the end of the day, it's just who is that one person that's going to give you that shot. I was lucky that I was given a chance to be able to do what I do with my kids, and it's been an amazing journey so far as an educator. So,
Shauna, do you want to weigh in?
I do. Of course I do. I was thinking just in the asking of the question and also in Edwin's response, I've had several simultaneous thoughts. Thought number one is going back to when I was in fourth through eighth grade. My stepfather, my brother and I will use the language, made us learn Black history at home. And he had a textbook, and we were like, what, mom, stepfather, what, why, what's a part of this? What are you talking about? And he said, he would always say, they are not going to teach you this in school. And you need to know this. You need to know who you are. You need to know where you came from. You need, in order for you to know where you're going and how to get there, you need to have this information. They are not going to teach you this in school. And he was right. It fast forwarded, the other simultaneous thought was in having a conversation about Tulsa riots and Wilmington riots here in North Carolina, and sitting on a panel, not on a panel, but in a webinar with people that were saying, I had no idea that this happened right in our state. And this is the systemic, the systemic, the high level change. Who are the people that are in the room that says this needs to go in the book? This needs to be taught. This needs to be a standard. This needs to, we need to develop a curriculum that requires a certain space that is not just in one particular part of the world as the bar that says this is good, this is the right way to do it. The people in the room that are creating the standards, there has to be a wider berth, a wider, the parameters have to go from here to here, and maybe from here to here, or somewhere in between, so that the stories and the truths, more specifically, are more accessible and not just folklore, or I have the benefit of a family member that told me that I needed to know this. Yeah.
Thank you, Shauna. Rosa, you've talked a good bit already about the new initiatives, the programs, looking at kind of this macro level, the satellite view for systems. What can you offer Jason in his question about moving to a more systemic approach?
Systems are really hard to dismantle. I talked a little bit about, like, somebody chose to put these particular art pieces on the wall and found that these things were important and deemed them important. And so I think, when we're talking about systems, in education or in general, it's like, who are those people that are making these decisions? And how are we able to create a narrative where they deem these things to be a priority for them? I think, arts education, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility work, these are the things that usually have one person in an office. Here, fix all of our problems. And we have one person in the office for you. We are under-resourced, and we do this work because we're passionate about it. And so, although systems are hard to break through, I think the people that grapple with this work and do this work are strong enough to break through them and to take the time that it will take to be able to create the standards necessary so that these things are deemed to be a priority, right? I think, we have seen sort of this wave of diversity and equity and inclusion folks being hired in cultural institutions, and folks often, I've had a lot of people ask me questions about, what do you think, what is moving this? And I'm like, this is not new. I've been doing this work for 22 years. There are people that have been doing it longer than I have. You're just paying attention because there's been sort of like this righteous uprising, right? And voices. And I think that when things hit that fever pitch is when people really start paying attention. And so for us to really move that needle, there has to be some organizing so that we can get to that level and interrupt those narratives.
So now that we're at this feverish pitch, right? There's a moment, there's an opening, there's a window of opportunity perhaps for organizing, for moving the needle. Another question just came in. It's one that a few people are writing. And I'd like to go back to Edwin on this, thinking about classroom level resources, right? What resources should systems be providing? In this sense, perhaps it's school systems, but perhaps it's this larger arts ecosystem, right? What resources should they be providing to help schools and districts effectively build strong arts communities? And how do you think these resources have changed since COVID-19? Edwin, can you think with us on that?
I'm here. Yeah. So there is there's a lot of unlimited resources, right, that we can use, and in the educational system, I think, and I'm gonna go back to what you asked before, that who is in charge of these, of what is brought to the schools, right? What is brought to the schools? I teach dance, PE, art, and then my resources have been pretty much me and my creativity and outside resources. I mean, I got to think outside the box because sometimes the resources that we want are not provided to us. But to go back to the question, what resources should we have? We should have, I think, we shouldn't just focus on just the learning, the reading and the math and make it seem like that is the only important thing in our school. Our kids don't just come to school just for learning to read and math, right? There's all these components that make up a whole well-rounded education. Again, for me, I worked for an organization that pretty much, if I want to do anything, I get the support that I need. And it all comes down to the top because one, the teachers want it, and two, the parents also want it. So I'm not sure if that answered your question correctly.
Absolutely. I mean, thinking about parents as a resource, right? Particularly on this point that Rosa was bringing up earlier about organizing, right? How we can be organizing and deploying resources in ways that really can intervene at a systems level. Also, Shauna, thinking beyond the school day, right? How can we be thinking about resources and infusing those or bringing synergy, right? Maximizing resources that are available, but using them maybe in ways that are different than we have them.
I want to quickly jump in, and I don't want to forget to say that one of the best benefits of this time is the lack of access to create, I can just go down the street and go see a movie or go to a concert. You can't just do anything, right? And so it's fascinating to me how that there's a hunger and a thirst now for arts and creativity that at least I can only speak as an American. I've never lived in any other country before, but it's like people are longing for creativity, and I think that this is like the perfect opportunity if you're thinking about starting a program, right? This is the perfect opportunity, to come to whoever is the gatekeeper, I'll say, right, with a fully formed thought. Because if y'all are working in any type of school systems or bureaucratic space, you know that a fully formed thought that doesn't require somebody to do extra work to make your dream happen. If you're like, okay, look, here's the box. I already thought about everything. I know where transportation is coming from. I know how much space we need. I know here's the budget, right? We need this number. Like the fully formed thought, people are listening. Their ears are like this, like what? Okay, because for the first time since I'd say this is the first time that I've experienced a significant focus on how arts how it's not just STEM and people poo-poo the A, it like STEAM, and how the arts can almost like create this technicolor science experience, this technicolor math experience. Like it's like adobo seasoning accent. It just makes everything better, you know? As an A+ Schools of North Carolina fellow, we teach this arts integration on a school-wide level. School-wide meaning principal down to staff that is not teachers, and anybody that makes the school go, they are in this training. And when there is more of an attention and focus on recommitting our communities to creativity, where arts is not special, it is special, but it's not an option. It's not an elective. It is a thing that you do when you get to a certain grade. This is what we do, and we perpetuate it and we support it. Also, Courtney, you asked me about the textbook. It is called The Black Book. I don't know if I can put it in the chat, but it is The Black Book. That's a textbook by stepfather. Kayla.
Thank you for that resource. In addition to your thoughts on this, and then the MFA Boston, a key resource in that region, right? Itself as a resource. But in COVID, how have things changed, particularly as resources are being made available for young folks, for education, for partnering with schools?
You know, I am super proud of, just to sort of give you where I sit in sort of the organization. So there's a Department of Inclusion, which is within the Learning and Community Engagement department, which is all sort of the education. And so the virtual learning, and you know, I want to tell educators out there to go to mfa.org, because the work that and the output that our staff and our educators are putting out is superb. It's really focused on our collection and presenting it responsibly. I'm sorry, my internet connection, it comes in and out, so I apologize for that. But you know, they're presenting curriculum and ensuring that there is representation of BIPOC artists, and that this is done in a responsible way within, you know, inclusive environments. I just recently did a training for some of our volunteers who are putting forth sort of this curriculums on inclusive Zoom environments, and what does that look like, and you know, what are some of the things that might come up for students as we are in sort of in these new settings, how to present the identity of a Black or Latino artist, and why identity of an artist is important. And so these are the things that are happening here. There are tons of resources that are virtual resources that are taking tours of exhibitions. There's one on Basquiat, which I think it's superb, and folks should look into those, because we're talking about culturally responsive, right, education and practices. And so that is really decentering sort of those white supremacist narratives to placing this amazing graffiti artist in the center. And so, yes, there are tons of resources that are being offered through mfa.org and our learning department. And I definitely, you know, encourage you to look at those.
Thank you so much for that. Our guests today are resource experts Shauna Tucker, Executive Director at Kids Notes, Rosa Rodriguez-Williams, the Senior Director of Belonging and Inclusion at the MFA Boston, and Edwin Sorto, Art, PE, Dance, and Music Teacher at KIPP DC Promise Academy. As we near the end of our time together, I'm thinking about what's next. There are many community advocates, teachers, and policy makers working to ensure equitable educational futures. So I'd like to hear from each of you what you will be advocating for. What are you going to be pushing colleagues to consider in the next 4 years to ensure arts education is more accessible and culturally responsive to the needs of children of color. Rosa, can we pick back up with you?
Do it again. Apologies. That's like if I had a yearbook, literally that would be the quote under my picture because I do that all the time. First, thank you for having me. This has been incredibly informative for me too. I've learned so much. And so I appreciate being here as we close. You know, I'm a few months old here. This is an incredible place and space. And so what the next 4 years look like, I don't have an actual sort of mapped out. But you know, but what I can say is that, you know, going back to the work that our K through 12 learning department is doing, working, you know, pulling some levers in terms of, you know, I like to say that the staff here, the folks that are, you know, from exhibitions to curators to interpretations, you know, we are facilitators of the museum experience. We are sort of the front lines of belonging and of offering this resource, this beautiful resource and space to everybody. In creating and curating a space where everybody feels that they belong. And so, you know, some of those levers are, you know, our barriers to belonging are human, our human interactions. And so for me, some of those levers are going to be, you know, education and learning about, you know, how to, you know, use decolonization frameworks and how to decenter whiteness and to ask the questions of who is in the room and who is not in the room, what voices are heard and why not, what are those narratives that have been part of the 150-year-old history of this place that, you know, we must dismantle to create something new, you know, honoring some of the history, but also, you know, creating something bigger and better that is for all of Boston. And so that's really what I'm looking forward to. I can say that a lot of the conversations that I've been having with folks here are excited and ready to push that vision forward. And I just look forward to it.
Edwin, tell us your thoughts on this. What should we be striving for?
But first and foremost, just thank you for allowing us again for just being here and, you know, just sharing our thoughts on what we do every day. I will push for access. Okay, access. The arts and particularly dance are often an afterthought, or they're always, you know, pushed to the margins by traditional academic subjects, right? Which is not cool. Our children would not realize their full potential. Schools won't acknowledge the whole child, which has been a problem, right? The extent to which Black and brown children are denied instructional and participation in the arts is an opportunity gap that people have been willing to accept. Not cool. But I believe that it is exacerbated the academic opportunity gap that we are working so hard to close, right? Every single child deserves robust and meaningful opportunities to engage with the arts. If we don't give it to them, like they missing out, right? And disengagement is, for me, I think is fundamental, not just only improving academics, but also recognizing and celebrating the diversity in our humanity. Second, I think I will continue to advocate for the importance of students seeing themselves in their lessons. This doesn't look the same across classrooms, schools, districts, but if your education isn't about you, it's hard to believe that it's for you, right? Like, and it's not gonna make no sense. That might mean, right? That means that finding different things to teach or just making the explicit connections between students and the content. The most important thing is to work those connections into everything that we teach, so that our students know that their education isn't just something for them, but it's also about them. And I'm going for that for the next however time I got left teaching.
Really inspirational, Edwin. Thank you. And Shauna, we'll give final thoughts to you.
Oh, I could just piggyback you know, like I'm over here trying to keep my snaps down here under camera, but I was like, access, yes. I had mentioned earlier, you know, we call dance, theater, art, music in schools, we call them specials. And depending on the school that you're in, they may happen once a week, they may happen on a rotation. You might get a special a week. And we got to stop that. You know, like that, we have to start it as a continuous first thought and first reach, not an afterthought that we're trying to jam into the schedule. Oh shoot, we forgot to okay, so maybe they can double up on. No. These are subjects that are essential to healthy human beings and healthy lives and confident, creative human beings that are contributing members to society and people that we actually want to work together with. You know, that is, we don't have time for that sermon. However, I think that, you know, like there's so many studies that talk about music and the provision of a stronger functioning brain and structural, you know, realities of what happens when you start music or when music is introduced at an early age. And I think just the consistency piece, if we can continue on with that for the arts. Also, as I look through standards of study here in my state, we use language like Western, and we set, again, you know, Western and orchestra and orchestral instruments as a bar, and there's, you know, and other world instruments. And it's like, can we make sure that that the people in the room are representative of those who are in our schools, those who are in our communities? Can we ensure that? Because once we ensure that, the conversations are going to be different. The access to a relevance and awareness is going to be different. I feel like that's going to be a whole new seminar that we'll just have to come back for part 2. But in the meantime, I thank you, the Hunt Institute, and my fellow panelists for this was such a wonderful time. And all the questions that, did you see the Q&A is lit? There's like 8,000 questions in there. My goodness gracious.
I couldn't have said any of that better. Thank you, Rosa, Edwin, Shauna, for sharing your work and your new initiatives for culturally responsive arts education. I'm inspired. I'm excited to take these ideas back to my colleagues and community to strengthen our policies and programs. Also, to you watching and listening today, I appreciate your engagement with the panelists. The conversation has been important in laying out information and possibilities for how policymakers, K-12 teachers and school leaders, as well as higher education, can advance educational equity in and through the arts. Now, I'd like to ask Senegal Mabry to highlight additional resources from the Hunt Institute that I know you don't want to miss.
Thank you immensely, Dr. Cray, for leading such a beautiful conversation. I would dare say this was a work of art. So thank you all to our amazing panelists, Dr. Amelia Cray, Associate Professor of Art at the University of Arizona, Shauna Tucker, Executive Director of Kids Notes, Edwin Sorto, Dance, PE, Art, and Spanish teacher at KIPP, DC Promise Academy, and Rosa Rodriguez-Williams, Senior Director of Belonging and Inclusion at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Thank you for today's conversation. Our next event in the Race and Education webinar series is going to take place at March 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on the invisible tax, educators of color, faced by educators of color, and the water they carry. So thank you all. We hope that you join us for that conversation, and please continue to stay safe and stay healthy, and remember the power of an arts education in engaging our children, especially our children of color. Happy Black History Month, and speak to you soon. Wishing you well.